What if the cargo in the back of your truck wasn't the only thing riding with you that night? Some roads are quiet, too quiet. And sometimes what you hear in the dark isn't just animals shifting in their cages. I worked as a long-haul truck driver in Sonora back in 2001. And what I hauled most often was live livestock, especially pigs. Every trucker I knew from that time had at least one strange encounter with something supernatural. I don't know if it has anything to do with those specific animals or not, but this happened to me. And it was one of the most disturbing experiences I ever had. That night I was hauling around 200 pigs from a farm inland to a slaughterhouse. It was late, and I knew the road by heart. The trailer was one of those metal cage rigs, with slatted sides for ventilation and flooring designed so the animals wouldn't slip. The pigs were packed in tight, and the noise from them was constant, but you get used to it. Grunts, snorts, bodies thudding against metal, the occasional squeal. That's normal. I had a radio show playing because on a quiet night route like that, I worried about getting sleepy. I kept myself entertained, half paying attention to what they were saying while lost in my own thoughts. Then, without warning, I heard a peculiar squeal. It was loud and harsh, and it made me tense up in my seat. It wasn't the typical squeal when they shove each other or step on one another. It was exaggerated. It sounded like a pig being slaughtered. I tensed up immediately. My first thought was that one of them had gotten hurt or stuck somehow, so I pulled over where I could and got out to check. When I walked up to the trailer, what I found didn't match what I just heard. There was no chaos. No animal was squealing. The pigs were quiet, staring back at me as I shined my flashlight inside. I could hear their normal breathing and the soft shifting of bodies adjusting, but no screaming, no fighting. I walked all the way around the trailer. Nothing was out of place. I stood there a few more seconds, waiting to hear the squeal again so I could pinpoint it, but nothing happened. I figured maybe I imagined it, or maybe the sound had come from somewhere in the brush nearby. Maybe someone out there had slaughtered a pig. Honestly, I wasn't too interested in finding explanations. I got back on the road, listening to the radio and doing my best to avoid potholes so the animals wouldn't trip or fall. After a while, I was so caught up in my own thoughts that I barely noticed when another sound broke the normal silence of the road. It was a low, guttural laugh. For a moment, I thought it came from the radio program. It wasn't unusual for them to use canned laughter or for the host to laugh on air. But then I heard it again, and this time it didn't seem to come from the speakers. Then another. They were too similar to each other. Not clear. Not human. But not normal animal sounds either. They were deep laughs, like restrained chuckles coming from behind me, from the cage where the pigs were. It was a laugh that seemed to rise from the throat, and you could feel that it carried mockery in it. I turned off the radio completely and started to feel very uncomfortable, because I had no logical explanation for those laughs, which instead of stopping began multiplying. At that point, there was no fooling myself. The laughter was there, and it was coming from the back where the pigs were. I looked into the side mirrors, searching for anything that could justify the noise. In that kind of truck, you can see part of the cage through the sides, and with the help of the highway lights, I caught sight of a few pig snouts poking through the metal slats. Several pigs were pressed up against the bars, their noses sticking out, breathing, moving. And the laughter didn't stop. I know the sounds a pig makes. They're grunts and squeals. But a pig doesn't laugh like that. I don't even think they're capable of making anything close to a laugh. And these laughs sounded too much like human laughter, but guttural and deep, like something trying to imitate a pig. God knows I wanted to slam on the brakes and get out of that truck right then. But that stretch of road leading to the slaughterhouse was completely deserted, and the isolation felt even worse in that moment. In the end, I had no choice but to grip the steering wheel and keep driving, pretending I couldn't hear the laughter coming from behind me. I didn't dare stop to check again, because deep in my gut I could feel there was something in the back of that truck that was better left unseen. Sometimes the laughter would stop, and I'd feel relief. But just when I thought maybe it was over, it would burst out again. Louder. The tires would hit a pothole, and the laughter seemed to answer. I'd change lanes, and the sound would rise again. That was another thing that unsettled me. It didn't feel random. It felt like it was reacting to what I did. I reached the slaughterhouse around 1 in the morning. The place was brightly lit, like always, and I thanked God because the laughter stopped. There were workers on site. I parked where I was told. That's when I noticed my hands were shaking, but I acted normal, spoke with the manager, signed what needed signing. Then I went back to the truck while they began counting the animals. The workers started unloading the pigs. They came out pushing each other, squealing, just like during any normal delivery. I watched closely to see if any of them would laugh or look at me differently. Anything that would prove I hadn't imagined it. But they were just farm animals. When they were almost done unloading, one of the workers stared into the back of the trailer and said there was an animal that wasn't moving. I walked over too. In one corner there was a dead pig. We assumed it was a heart attack or something like that, but when we looked closer it had a wound on its forehead. It was a hole like someone had driven an awl or a spike straight into its head. That was the clearest sign for me. That dead pig with that wound closed the circle of what I'd been feeling since the laughter began. There was something about that trip that wasn't normal. That night, from the moment I heard that squeal in the back, something rode with me. Something that wasn't part of the cargo and definitely wasn't a pig. I believe in spirits, but I don't believe a simple ghost could kill an animal like that. That's why I think something else. Something not human. Something demonic got into that truck and decided to play with my head, with the animals, or maybe both. In the years after that, I hauled pigs many more times. I heard squeals again, and sometimes strange noises from the load. Laughter, banging, very human-like cries, but never anything as intense as that night. That's why I think those animals can attract something, though maybe that part is just my own speculation. What if you were hit by a truck, and no one else saw it happen? What if you felt the impact, heard the horn, saw the headlights right on top of you, but to everyone else you simply collapsed in the middle of the road? Good evening, Glenn. My name is Samira, and I hope you have time to read my story. This happened in 2010, when I was still living in Tangancicuaro de Arista, before I moved to Mexico City. Tangancicuaro is a mid-sized town along the highway toward Guadalajara. There are stretches where the road opens up into 4 lanes, and along the sides you'll find roadside businesses, auto shops, a gas station, and mostly taco stands. I worked part-time at one of those taco places. I was 19 and the night shift worked for me because during the day I helped at home, and in the afternoon I studied. It wasn't my dream job, but it gave me money and a bit of independence. The night it happened, I was just about to finish my shift. It was around 11, maybe a little later. You could hear cars passing every so often, a truck in the distance, the normal sounds of the highway. I had already cleaned the grill and cleared the tables when I heard 2 voices call my name, Roxana and Diego. They were part of my close group of friends and lived right across the highway, in houses that sat directly along the road. They waved and told me to come over later because they were hanging out and having a few drinks. I told them yes, that I'd head over in a bit. It was Friday after all, and I wasn't in a rush since my house was relatively close, and I could walk home whenever I wanted. When I finished my shift, I told my boss I was leaving, put on my sweater, grabbed my things, and stepped outside. From the edge of the taco stand, I looked toward where my friends were sitting. They were outside one of the houses laughing. I remember I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I just had to cross the road like I'd done so many times before. It's true, it wasn't a small street. It was a 4-lane highway. But at that hour, there weren't as many cars as during the day. Even so, I checked. I walked up to the edge of the asphalt and looked to my left. No cars were coming, so I waved at my friends. I don't remember what I said to them. I started crossing. They waved back, and I think I had taken 4 or 5 steps when I heard a loud long horn, the kind you hear from a big rig. It pierced my ears. It sounded so close that for a split second, I thought it was my boss messing around with an air horn. But that thought disappeared instantly. As fast as I could, I turned to my left. And oh my God, I don't know where it came from, but there was a massive semi-truck right on top of me. How did it get so close without me hearing it? Without its headlights blinding me? I don't know. But I remember the height of it. How enormous it looked compared to me. I didn't have time to think. There was no dramatic movie moment where I could jump out of the way. In that second, the only thing I understood with complete clarity was that I was going to die. I didn't think about my mom or my dad. I didn't see my life flash before my eyes. The only word that crossed my mind was simply, okay. Like accepting something inevitable. I waited for the impact, but the impact didn't come the way it should have. Instead of feeling a blunt collision, I felt something else. It was like a powerful, painful electrical surge shot through my entire body. A violent current that hit me all at once and made me shake. It was brutal. My muscles locked up, and at the same time I stopped feeling my hands and legs. The next thing I remember is that the truck for a brief moment seemed translucent. I don't know if that's the exact word, but it's the closest one. It was like seeing something that was there and not there at the same time. It had shape and lights, but its body looked wrong, like it wasn't completely solid. That image burned itself into my memory because it was the last thing I saw. After that, nothing. I don't remember falling. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember the sound of an engine driving away. My eyes just closed, and I guess I collapsed unconscious onto the asphalt. I woke up the next morning in the town hospital. At least I think it was morning. For me, it felt like a blink. My parents were there, both extremely worried. I tried to ask what had happened, but before I could speak properly, a doctor and a nurse came in and started asking the typical questions to check awareness. My name, where I was, what day it was. They checked my pupils and asked me to move my hands. I was confused, but I could answer. In the end, they told me I was fine, and that they'd leave me alone with my family for a while. That's when my 2 friends came in. When I was alone with my parents and my friends, the first thing I asked was how I was alive. Everyone looked tense, but I felt strangely calm. I told them I'd been hit by a truck. My friends looked at each other confused. They said there was no truck. At first I thought they were just saying that so I wouldn't panic. But then they explained what they had seen. According to them, I started crossing the highway and everything looked normal. But when I reached the first lane, they said I started acting strange. Like I wobbled. Like I froze for a second. And then I just fainted. There was no semi-truck that hit me. That's why I was intact. I only had a scrape on my arm from the fall. My friends ran across the highway to get me. They said they almost got hit themselves trying to reach me. They picked me up and took me to the town hospital. While they were telling me this, I felt a horrible mix of emotions. On one hand, relief. On the other, overwhelming confusion. If a truck didn't hit me, then what did I see? No one saw a semi. No one heard the horn that I heard so close to me. I told them I saw a truck run me over and that I felt that electric surge. That something shot through my body and everything went dark. After I said that, they started running all kinds of tests and exams to figure out what had happened and why I'd seen something like that. I had no psychiatric history. I wasn't on any medication. They found nothing strange in my body. I was 19 and healthy. I worked. I walked every day. In the end, they convinced me that my blood pressure must have dropped. That because of stress and exhaustion, I saw something that wasn't really there. They prescribed vitamins and rest, and eventually everything went back to normal. I accepted what they told me so I wouldn't worry my parents anymore. But I know what it feels like to get dizzy or faint. And that night was nothing like that. For weeks I was afraid to cross the highway. Every time a semi-truck passed by, my body would go rigid. And I was left with a question that still follows me. I've accepted that maybe I hallucinated. But then I go back to the same question. Why did it feel so physical? There's an idea I'm embarrassed to say out loud, but it's the only one that, as crazy as it sounds, fits what I experienced. That night, maybe a truck that wasn't in this plane passed right through me. If it had just been a hallucination, I would understand not feeling an impact. But that electricity, like something brushed against me, I can't ignore that. I've also thought about other dimensions. And sometimes I wonder if, in another version of that night, I did die. If on another road, in another Tangansikwaro, in another 2010, the truck really did hit me. And what I felt here was the echo of that. I don't know. But ever since then, every time I hear the horn of a semi-truck very close by, I feel that same electric current run through my body. Like something is about to run me over again. Have you ever picked up a hitchhiker and realized too late that she wasn't meant to reach any destination at all? Some passengers just need a ride. Others might be reliving something that already happened. I drove a semi-truck for nearly 40 years. And although I'm retired now, I collected plenty of road stories during that time. Some are easy to explain. It's exhausting work, and when you've been driving too long without stopping, it's normal to see things. But others aren't so simple to process. And this story I want to share is one I've never been able to make sense of. I've replayed it many times in my mind, and I still don't fully understand how it happened. It was in the early 90s. I was 32 years old and heading toward Querétaro. It was vacation season, the time of year when highways are packed. By then I already knew alternate routes and secondary roads. They weren't comfortable, but they could save me several hours. The one I was taking that night was narrow and full of curves, though most stretches were well lit. It was around 9 at night, and a light drizzle was falling. I was alone, and the radio signal was bad, so I had it turned off. Just outside a small town, in a stretch where there were still a few scattered houses before it turned into open fields, I saw a woman standing at the side of the road, hitchhiking. For a second, the usual highway ghost stories crossed my mind, but she didn't look like the typical figure from those legends, dressed in white with long black hair. She looked fairly normal. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She wore colored clothes. What stood out to me most was her face. It wasn't calm. It showed urgency. It was late and it was raining. Leaving someone stranded there didn't seem right. I pulled over and she climbed into the truck without me having to insist. She introduced herself as Abigail after thanking me over and over again. She started complaining about how cold it was. Her hands were damp and she was trembling while she explained that her boyfriend had abandoned her on the road after an argument, leaving her there without a second thought. I kept driving and tried not to get too involved because it was clear Abigail was upset and emotional. I asked the basic questions: where she was headed, if she wanted me to take her somewhere specific, if there was someone who could come pick her up. She answered, but as the minutes passed, something strange began happening. Her responses didn't quite match what I was asking. She answered as if I had said something else entirely. It felt like she was following a different conversation than the one I was having with her. Sometimes she talked about details I hadn't mentioned at all, and her demeanor started to shift. She became more nervous, irritated, restless. Had asked was inappropriate, even though had asked was inappropriate. Even though by that point I was completely silent. I was driving with both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road like always. And yet she reacted as if I were invading her space. I could see growing distrust on her face, building by the second. She tensed up so much that the cab, already a tight space, felt smaller. And then suddenly, in a split second, she panicked. She jerked violently and screamed at me to stop touching her. It was absurd. We were in a moving truck, and she suddenly acted like she was being attacked. Before I could even process what was happening, Abigail opened the door and jumped out of the truck. I was moving fast because we were on a straight stretch, around 70 kilometers per hour. On a road like that with drizzle and wet asphalt, that speed is already dangerous for any maneuver. I slammed on the brakes, but the truck kept sliding forward for a long stretch, while the tires burned against the pavement, until it finally came to a stop. When I got out, I expected to see a body lying several yards behind the truck. A woman shattered by the impact with the asphalt, or at best, someone severely injured. But that's not what I saw. As I walked around the truck, I didn't see anyone on the ground. And when I looked to the other side, there was Abigail. She was standing, staring at me with intense rage. It was a direct, burning look of hatred that I couldn't understand, as if I had done something unforgivable. I tried to speak, to ask if she was okay. But before I could get a full word out, Abigail let out a terrible scream and ran toward the brush. She disappeared into the darkness, into the shrubs, toward nothing but open land and trees, as if she knew the place well. I stood there for a second without moving, debating whether to follow her. In the end, I stepped back and climbed back into my truck. As soon as I got inside, a smell hit me that hadn't been there before. It wasn't the normal damp scent that comes in when it rains. It was something unpleasant, like wet earth mixed with something rotten. The smell hit the back of my throat and made me nauseous instantly. On the passenger seat, the fabric was still damp where Abigail had been sitting. There were muddy marks on the floor. A feeling of strangeness settled over me. A fall like that at that speed isn't something you walk away from unharmed. Before starting the engine again, I looked toward the brush, trying to spot her. But the darkness and the drizzle swallowed everything within seconds. I waited to hear something else, but all that remained was the soft sound of rain and the hum of the engine. I rolled down the window to air out the cab and left as quickly as the road allowed. Cold air and drizzle came in, but the smell didn't fade right away. It clung to the passenger seat until the next morning when I stopped in a town and scrubbed it with soap and hot water. During the rest of that drive, I had the strong feeling that I had never picked up a normal person in the first place. Not just because of that impossible jump she survived without injury, but because of the nonsensical answers. The way she reacted as if I were someone else. And especially the way her rage at the end didn't seem directed at me over a misunderstanding. It felt like I represented something else to her. Over the years, I've heard many versions of similar stories. A woman asking for a ride. A woman who gets in and then disappears. One who leaves a chill in the cab. One who leaves behind a foul odor. In my case, she didn't vanish inside the truck. She jumped, landed without harm, and ran into the fields. As if her goal wasn't to reach anywhere, but simply to ride with me for a while and then leave. I've tried to explain it as a psychotic episode, as someone altered by drugs or in the middle of a crisis. But that explanation doesn't hold up when you consider that she jumped from a moving truck and didn't suffer a single injury. I've had years to think about every possibility of what happened that night. The only certainty I have is that something very strange took place. I have only one hypothesis. Something terrible happened on that road. Something happened to Abigail. And her presence manifested in my truck that night. The smell of dampness and death lingered in my cab until the next morning. And in my mind, I can only hope that Abigail someday finds the peace that one night someone took from her.